All right. We've been talking about some of the ways that Christians are weird. And yes, it's true. Just embrace it. Just say it to yourself. I am weird in some ways. Just say it. I'm weird. Just own it, man. Just own being weird. Nothing wrong with being weird. You know, it's true. We've talked about how it's baked into the design of following Christ. You know, being holy on some levels is really being weird, you know, because you're being different in a lot of ways than people are used to. And weird is just different from the norm of what people have. There's good weird, bad weird, but just weird in general is not necessarily bad. It's baked into the teachings of follow Christ. We talked about that. Loving your enemies, not regular. You know, honestly choosing not to have enemies. We talked about a couple of weeks ago. Just say you don't have enemies. You got bad friends, okay? And you just got to treat them like bad friends. They're your friends. That's really hard. Choosing not to have enemies and having that mentality is really difficult. But you know, it's kind of what we need to do. You know, giving your life away for a purpose that a lot of people around don't even acknowledge exists. That's difficult. You know, it often gets met with strange looks. You know, weird isn't bad because God uses weird to help us see things in new ways and with a different perspective. You know, God uses weird to challenge us, you know, and do all kinds of things. I remember when my sister-in-law, Emily, who was an honor student in high school, you know, told her parents, like, coming out of high school, I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to I think I'm just going to go travel with this national ministry and just completely forego college. I'm out to raise money and run around and go around and sing all over the place. You know, her two older sisters had gone to OBU and they expected she would probably do the same, but no, she didn't. And that was weird. It was tough for even those of us who follow Christ and her parents who are great believers. That's a tough thing to hear from your kid. You're like, okay, you're changing the plan. Something's weird, you know, but, you know, God has worked through it. Sometimes it's hard for even Christians to stomach when you see other Christians being a little bit weird from the world. It's a little bit tough. You know, it was worse. I think it was worse for their parents when they, you know, she told them that she was going to marry a guy who was going into the lucrative breadwinning career of ministry. You know, that was even weirder, you know, and she knew me, so it was already weird. So it was tough. It was tough when you heard that too. But, you know, today we're going to look at a different type of weird, not the good stuff. When I put this series together a few months ago, back in like January, December, when I put the series together, I ran across an article by Carey Nieuwhof, who is a podcaster, former church planter, former pastor, does a lot of writing now, and it was talked about the bad ways that Christians are weird, and I thought, that's perfect. And it just inspired a whole new set of things for me to think about when I was looking at this. And I said, you know what, we need to talk about that. You know, these are ways that while we are different from the ways God intended us to be, but so often in our immature attempts to be like God or to prove to others or sometimes prove to ourselves that we're good Christians, we can actually prove to us that we have a real long way to go. Or we're heading the wrong way to begin with. And what I want to look at is a story in Luke 18 about a guy who was very weird, like very bad weird, you know, in religious ways, and the kind of weird that God doesn't approve of, you know, but the kind of weird that you're going to find out there are a lot of people here today, that not here today, but are still today, that kind of weird. So Luke 18, we're going to look in verse 9, and we'll start there. If you want to follow along with my notes, you can do that. Jill does an awesome job with our notes. You can just go to baywestchurch.com/notes on your smart device, or if you have the little brown Bible app, you can go to the events section of the YouVersion app and type in Bay West Church, and my notes pull up. You can follow there. If you got your paper Bible and a notebook, great. No worries. Write down what God's going to tell you. So then Jesus told this story to some. I love the audience. To some who had great confidence in their own righteousness. We don't know anyone like that. You don't know anybody like that in your head. Nobody jumped in your mind. You're like, oh, that's just like, you didn't. So anyway, great confidence in their own righteousness and scorned everyone else. I'm sorry. There's a lot of jokes about Calvinists. They're always angry and mad at people. You know, that's not true. They're wearing the beard and the plaid shirts. No, they're not. It's okay. We're not talking about that. So if you're Calvinist, you're a great person. Love you. Don't worry about that. But these people, some who had great confidence in their own righteousness and scorned everyone else. And so Jesus was great at all about telling stories to people. Think about telling this story to people who were kind of the people in the story. You see what I mean? When Jesus started to tell a story, there was usually somebody there that needed to hear the story. And so you got to see the disciples going through this. And obviously at some point they started looking around. As they saw this happen over and over again, said, well, who's he talking about? And start looking out and see who that was. And if you're hanging out with Jesus and he starts with, well, let me tell you a little story. And people are like, hey, wait a minute. Okay, all right. Is he about to get my business? And they should, because he was about to get in somebody's business in verse 10. So he continues with the story in verse 10. Let's go to verse 10. There we go. It said, 2 men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a despised tax collector. In verse 11, the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer. I thank you, God, that I am not like other people, cheaters and sinners and adulterers, and I'm certainly not like that tax collector. He's thinking about the guy over there praying. It says, I fast twice a week and I give you 1/10 of my income, on verse 12. So it says it's funny. It's funny. It said, but this is a guy who is going to be the villain of the story. But if you read his resume, what do we know? Well, he doesn't like cheating. He doesn't like sin. He's not into adultery. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like organized crime, which is kind of what tax collecting was. It was kind of governmental organized crime back then, if you read about it. There's a lot of similarities there. It said he fasts. Do you guys fast? That's supposed to be, that's the thing we should do. He said, he tithes. Okay, that's right. It's like he doesn't like bad stuff, and he seems to be doing good stuff. So that looks like a person that all of us would like to be. Is it true about his life? I don't know. But anyway, let's continue on verse 13. It says, but the tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, "Oh God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner." This guy is a problem, and he admits it. We don't know what happened right before this or right after. We don't know, did he just steal from a widow? Did he just feel bad about his job? Is this normal for him? Did he get caught in a crime? Is he just going through his life and just the weight of sin? What's his backstory? We don't know, because it doesn't matter. Because look what Jesus said in verse 14. I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So let me get this straight. The sinner who admitted he had a problem and didn't think he was that great and had nothing on his resume to back up anything good, not the Pharisee, the guy who from the outside did all the things right, who had the perfect life, he was the villain of the story, the Pharisee was, and the sinner was the right guy. Now, I think that should be encouraging to all of us who don't have our act together, all right? That's a good thing for you, right? That's a place to start. But, but there's also some things that are really scary for us in this as well. And I don't know if we pick up on this all the time. John Roberts, who's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he has a famous quote that he wrote or said, I don't know if he wrote it or said it, years ago, but it talking about racism and how we deal with that in his opinion. He said, the way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. And you think that's great. Okay, we're going to, don't be racist. If you want to stop being, prejudiced on the basis of race, okay, let's just stop. If we want to stop it, then let's stop it. You don't fight it with more of it. And that reminds me, some of what people do here and what the Pharisee does here, what people do a lot of times, they kind of do to the Pharisee in the story. A lot of people look at the story of the tax collector and the Pharisee and they miss the point. They actually use the story to justify why they're okay for not doing all the right things. I admit I'm a sinner, at least I'm not the uptight Pharisee, And then they go find their own brand of Pharisee and they give them the same treatment that the Pharisee gave the tax collector. In other words, they Pharisee the Pharisee. And we miss the point. Because the truth is, the way to stop Phariseeing others wrongly is to stop Phariseeing others wrongly, so to speak. Now, it's true that faith without works is dead. If there's not something showing up in your actions that shows your faith, but the truth is, if your faith isn't driving your works, the works will become sinful. And we're all in the same boat, and you have another problem there. Because the point is doing things doing the right thing also for the right reasons. And the problem is that when we look at the problem that you see here, and you see a lot of times when people Pharisee the Pharisee, and then you see the Pharisee, and everybody else, everybody's trying to look for some other metric to evaluate themselves on that doesn't exist on God's dashboard. On God's dashboard, it's Jesus. Are you Jesus? Okay, no. Okay, then that's it. You need my help. That's basically what it comes down to. Now you think, okay, yeah, we all get that. All right, so what about this? Have you ever seen anybody say this, or have you thought this to yourself? You've seen somebody do something and out of the corner of your eye or whatever, and you're like, well, I'm not stuck up and uptight like that person. I'm a free Christian who lives in freedom to do and say what I want, Hallelujah. Wait a minute. That sounds a whole lot like, I'm glad I'm not like that sinner, the tax collector. Maybe you've seen someone who's caught in a bad situation or in a rough relationship, or they've had some financial issues. Well, I'm sure glad I'm not like that. If they just, yeah, maybe if they'd adjust, but here's the thing. Are you sounding a whole lot like, I'm glad I'm not that sinner, the tax collector? You see, the problem is you're still a sinner. And so was the Pharisee. And what we're trying to do when we do that, we're still trying to justify ourselves by grading our sin as less than others, rather than justify ourselves through faith in Jesus alone. It's just a different thing. I think this is a bit of a problem in the church. And I think it's a problem with believers who are trying to deal with people in society that have different goals and different understanding of how they should live their life. So often, I think we teach lost people by our example to Pharisee each other. And then when you see them step into the realm of the religious to try to speak back to us, what we see them do is they start Phariseeing us right back. And that's rightly so, because we kind of taught it to them. And when we fail, or we don't exhibit things that are Christ-like, or when we have sin, or when we aren't consistent, they come right back at you. And I want to give you some, and to look at this, I want us to recognize that in our lives. And I want to conquer that in our lives today. And so what I want to give you some words of perspective about relationships. And these can apply across the way, okay? Especially with people not in the church, but also with people in the church. I want to give some perspective about with others from this story that we can learn to avoid, so that we can avoid the bad kind of weird, okay? That's what we're trying to do today. The first thing is this. I want you to judge, but don't judge. You're like, what? You kidding me? How am I supposed to? What? I don't get it. Honestly, if you read the Bible, you can feel like it's saying this sometimes. It's confusing because the Bible tells you not. The Bible says don't judge. Yeah, you'd be right. Matthew 7 says, "Judge not, lest you be judged." And then what's the rest of chapter 7 do? Tell you ways to judge what's happening in other people's lives. Are they a sheep or are they a wolf? Should I trust them? Should I not? Should I listen to them? Should I not? Let's look at what they're doing. Oh my goodness. By your fruit you will know them. That's judging. But you just said not judge. So I'm supposed to judge, but not judge. You can call it a contradiction, but I don't call it that. Call it a problem with the definition and the way that our language uses one word to mean many different things in context and nuance. And that's one of the problems when reading the Bible, is a lot of times people don't go back to what is the Bible saying in the context that it's saying it. And we just take our modern definition of whatever word we read and we just project that and we say, okay, that's a problem. You see that a lot of times people outside the church, because they don't really care to get down into the nitty gritty and know what's really being said. They read something, oh, that's crazy, and I'm not going to listen to it. And everybody Twitters it to death. If everything in the world needs to be broken down to one X post, I think people think, because if I can slam somebody in 22 words or 122 characters or 252 or whatever it is, if you got the blue check mark, go on forever. I don't know what it is. But everybody thinks it's just got to be put in one thing. I can shut everybody down. I can solve the world's problems. Look, people have been trying to solve the world's problems for thousands of years. And they ain't done it yet. You're not going to do it with a big quip or big thing other than Jesus is the answer. He is. But that's a lot of depth that goes down into showing that. There's a lot of place to go down and explains that. But the thing about it is, for us, I think the problem is that when we act like the word judge means something that it doesn't. Because what the Bible is telling us not to judge is what it's really saying is don't give someone the final judgment. That's the way I look at it. It says you aren't pronouncing them guilty and giving their final sentence. What did Jesus do when the woman was caught in adultery? right? You remember the scene? She was caught in adultery. They're going to drag her out in the street, and the law said stone her, and so all the dudes they're ganging up, and they're going to stone her to death right there, And Jesus is like, whoa, hey. He wrote something on the ground, scared them all to death. It's like, you who were without sin, cast the first stone. And everybody just he wrote something on the ground, and then everybody run off, And then he looks at the woman. And he says, I have no idea what you're doing. I have no comment on what you are. Be you like I made you. No, he didn't do that. He looked at her, and he evaluated what she'd been doing. He judged it and said, don't do that no more. Because he used better English or better Greek or whatever it was. Don't do that anymore. Go sin no more. See, and a lot of us have a problem with that story. We hear the don't judge. Oh, he said you without sin cast first stone, so you can't say nothing. Right? And they forget the part where he said, yeah, but don't do that anymore. So, I think what it shows is there's a problem with what we understand judging to be. See, God gives us standards and the ability to look at others and to evaluate or to judge. But it's not to compare, it's to help them. Remember, I just talked about doing things the right way for the right reasons. It's not a value statement to God about where we are in sin or not, because we are all on the same value baseline. Remember we talked about that last week? I can't do anything to make God love me anymore. I can't do anything to make God love me any less. I'm still in a problem if I don't have him. I'm still going to experience judgment if I don't choose him. I'm still going to have to answer for who I am, but it's not a matter of value or love with God. So look at David. He had some pretty big sins, if you want to talk about it. Murder, adultery, had the woman's husband killed, lied to people, used his authority and abused that power, and whatever you want to say. There's a lot that goes into the story of him and Bathsheba. But yet God called him a man after God's own heart. He called him that. It wasn't because he was a great guy, because he really was seeking after God. But here's the crazy thing. You might say, oh, well, he called him that before he did all that stuff. Well, here's the deal. God knew all that stuff was coming when he said it. Here's another thing. God left it in the Bible so that you and I could see it. He didn't have to leave it there. We know from John, there's a lot of things Jesus did and said that we don't even know. They couldn't be recorded. There's so much more that could have been recorded that was not recorded. We don't have the exhaustive history of Jesus in the Gospels. We have what we need to know to follow God. And what God is saying, so we have to think when God left something in the Bible, why did he leave that in there? He said he did this to help us learn to shape the way we look at other people. So instead of thinking up someone's punishment, I'm going to shun, unshun, whatever, whatever that is. I'm going to insult them. I'm going to give them a weird stare, my holy stare, all that stuff. You know what that is? That really is just like Christian virtue signaling. You've heard virtue signaling that people use nowadays. People have to say, oh, well, I'm not like that. Christians have been doing that for years. Hey, shut up. We know you're a sinner. Don't worry about it. Everybody, well, I'm not like that. It's just this. We're doing what the tax collector, what Pharisee did, right? When we do that out loud, we go, all this, I'm just so offended by what you do. Oh, I can't believe you do. Oh, those people over there. That's all you're doing. I'm glad I'm not like that tax collector. And Jesus is saying, you're missing the point. That's not the point. Here's where I want you to look at it like. Look at it like diagnosing a sickness. Let's change that. Let's go diagnose, don't judge. Let's do it like that. Let's look at it that way. When you see the symptoms of a cold, you don't go into a lecture about how someone's stupid to get a cold, do you? Or when someone breaks their arm. Now, those of us who were playing football way past our years that did that, maybe we need a little lecture. But that's not the point. We figure out what the problem is, and we try to help them. That's what we do. And when God gave us the power to say, look, their behavior isn't matching up with someone who's following me, that's going to lead them to all these things over here that are not good. It's not your job to judge them. It's your job to help them. But I got news for you. Nobody in here is righteous enough to stand on top of somebody else and tell them how it is. No. You can help them get out of it, but you can't tell them how it is. That's hard. And for those of us who are made where, you see something, you just, I want to fix it. That's really difficult. If you're low on the mercy scale, that's hard. You got to get over it. Let me say that. We got to get over it. I'm on that scale. I have to work very hard at times not to do that. But look at what Galatians 6 tells us. He said, dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by some sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. And be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. Verse 2 says, share each other's burdens, and in that way obey the law of Christ. So when we see someone in sin, what should have happened, the Pharisee should have seen the tax collector and should have done what I love to see sometimes in our church. He's over there. Well, son, let me go put my arm around. What's going on? Can I help you? How can I pray for you? Are you struggling with something? How can I help be accountable? I mean, I see you around all the time. You know, what is up? You know, you need to get out of that job. Do you need to do something else? What is going on? See, that's a different response than, I ain't like that guy. Woohoo! Look at my resume. But it's amazing how quickly we can do that without doing all of that. We find ways and loopholes of the way we state it all the time. Those people. That color skin. Oh, those political people. Oh, but I'm not like, hey, them over there, And it can feel like it sometimes, don't it? It's amazing how we can look at other people's sin and theirs is so bad. But what we're really trying to say is, mine's not that bad. I don't need the grace of Jesus like they do. And see, I love the way the AMP talks about this Galatians. In this Galatians 1, it says, the Amplified Bible just gives you every word that possibly could be translated, from that Greek word. So it tries to give you as many words as you can so you can really get the full nuance of what's being said. And I love what it says. It says, when it says gently, humbly help that person back on the right path, what that's actually translated as is set him right. In other words, correct him, restore him, heal him, and reinstate him. I love that part. Get that believer back to a productive level of making disciples and living and walking in the Spirit. That's what our responsibility is. And so often, we just get mad for the symptoms of sin. And I get it. I do, man. Sometimes a sin, somebody else's sin, what they say to me or what they do to me is so frustrating, and I get it. But at the end of the day, I can't be the Lone Ranger riding in fixing that. I've got to help that person get as close to Christ as I can, and then the rest of it has to be God's to take care of. Some of that might be holding them accountable. Some of them might be hard conversations. Some of it might be setting boundaries and holding a line and saying, look, this is how it's going to happen. You're going to have to do this. I'm trying to help you here. You got to stay with me. But we've got to do the right things for the right reasons. Because if you do the wrong things, you're in the wrong. If you do the right things, but for the wrong reasons, eventually those right things will be wrong because you're going to push them off the track. And we can't do it that way. Sometimes I think when you talk about reinstate him, and I do want to say this, sometimes in a leader's case, you don't necessarily, I've seen pastors, friends of mine that have fallen into deep sin and very difficult stuff, and they've had to step out of the pastorate. I don't necessarily think they need to be restored into the pastorate. I think that's a case-by-case basis. I'm not really sure on that. They can be restored to be a productive disciple maker, but not be back in the same position and role that they were in before. You said that's hard, but we're all judged on a different standard. It's hard. It said leaders are judged on a higher standard. Now that's some with the Lord and some with people as well. It's a little bit of both, but we have to watch that. But what you don't see, what I love in this verse though, you don't see anything about pronouncing judgment or punishing them. Hey, could you go back to verse 1, Armando? Just go back one and just make sure. Another believer is overcome by some sin. Those are godly should beat them and make fun of them and insult them and shun them. No, I don't see that. Gently and humbly help that person back on the right path. That's what we should be doing. And the truth is, even when people you've heard that people can be, like disassociated with the church or turned out of the church. I've had to do that one time in my career. I hated it. Hated every minute of it. I loved the dude, but it just had to be done. He would not turn from sin. Even that's a corrective measure. That's to get them to turn around. It's not punishment because they did wrong. I'm not trying to hurt them. And the guy that we had to do that with years and years and years ago, I kept contact with him. I kept begging him to turn around from his sin and to change his ways and to come back. But he chose not to. The second thing I want you to think about is not just diagnose, don't judge, but be humble, not hypocritical. Okay? Remember the Pharisee said, I'm not like other people. He said, whoo, that's a lot to that. And he listed up all these people who struggle with sin, and where they might even be, some of them struggle with the propensity to even want to not sin. I mean, that's hard at times. I mean, you get to that point, you're like, God, I really want to say this to this person, and it's not right. I don't want to do that. I want to do it, but I really need you to help me not to want to do it. That's where I'm getting down to. I'm trying, but it would be a whole lot easier, God, if you just make my want to or change, so I didn't want to do that. You could make them not say as many stupid things. That would be great. Or you could just change me. Either one, I don't care. Whatever. I mean, you can feel like that. And maybe you feel that in the ways that you deal with people. But what it is the thing is that in his quest to prove to whoever heard that he was not like them, he was saying that he was. And here's the thing. The word for hypocrite in the Greek means just an actor in a play. It's just a play actor. It means they're playing a role for others to see. I'm not a doctor, but I played one on TV. That's kind of what they're doing. And there are some things that are typical about hypocrites from Scripture. I mean, you might be surprised how much it talks about it. For Psalm 26 says, groups them with liars. And the truth is, they aren't truthful about themselves. And I'm going to say they're not truthful with themselves. Because if they're not okay explaining who they are to others, then they're probably lying to themselves about how worthless they are to be what they are, or lying or thinking they're going to, and they're obviously lying to themselves, think that's going to do anything. I'm just going to keep presenting an image and rotting on the inside. That's not going to work. Isaiah 8 tells us that they can be anyone, and they all speak foolishness. This Pharisee, you look at him. I mean, I hate to beat on him so much, but I mean, he's the point of the story. So he's, this is what he is. That was foolish. The things that he was saying. Everybody looked at that. You can imagine anybody around there's looking at that going, oh, well, that guy's so great. I want to be like him. No, they're like, oh, what a jerk. I mean, that's what everybody's thinking. He said, I'm so holy, and they're like, no, you're so jerky. That's what you are. Isaiah 29 tells us that they don't know what they think they know, or they wouldn't be hypocrites. In other words, they're ignorant and they're misguided. There's so much of our world is invested in sin, and it's because they think that sin is going to get them what they want, and it will end with a good thing. It never does. It doesn't. Most all of sin could be boiled down to, I am totally ignorant of really what's about to happen, and I'm totally misguided on how I should be dealing with the situation. Really, that's what it is. Matthew 6 tells us that they call attention to themselves. That's verse 2. That they pray loudly on the street corner so everyone can see them. Because that's their reward. That's their goal. They want to be seen. They want attention from others. They want to put up a front. When you're a hypocrite, you're trying to present something other than what you are. And the truth is that your attempt actually invalidates your projected identity, like it did here with the Pharisee. I'm so righteous, but you show that you really aren't that righteous simply because you think you are. It's crazy, right? I think I'm so good. No, you're not. You're really not. And if you really think that, you've proven my point. It's like when someone says, I don't believe in absolutes, okay? You just stated an absolute. So, I mean, what do you want to tell you? There's no absolute that's real? Okay, whatever. It's like that you can't do that. So they don't want, here's the thing about hypocrites. They don't want to be, they want to appear. Because they think appearing is easier than being, but it's not. So they play this role, playing a role, and nowhere is that more evident in the way that the Pharisee prays here in Luke 18. He wants everyone to hear. If he really was all those things, he didn't have to catalog that before God. God would know. I think God did. Kerry Newhoff, who wrote that article, I did pull one thing from his article that I thought was really, really good. And it was this quote right here. It says, I find the more humility I add to my words, the smaller the gap between who I am and the smaller the gap is between who I am and who I say I am. The more humility I add to my words, the smaller the gap is between who I am and who I say I am. And that's not false humility, where you constantly put yourself down, or you tell stories that are kind of like, oh, that you're the hero of the story, but it's like all these other things around that, kind of put you down in the middle of it. It's not about a joke, but that's how you tell the story. Said false humility is just pride dressed up in humility, to look like humility, rather. Humility is this: it's thinking less of yourself. It's not thinking less. Humility is thinking less of yourself. Isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. I tried a while to get it around, but you got it, right? It's not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. So not as often. You're not the center of every story. That's where pride comes from, when it's all about you. Verse Philippians 2:3 says this, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself. Basically, it starts with, it's not about you, okay? Stop trying to make it about how bad or good you are. Be who you are. Be humble. Put value on others rather than trying to establish value for yourself. The truth is that you often don't impress someone by telling them how great you are, but you do impact people by showing them how honest you are. You don't glorify the flaws, but you don't hide them either, because saving you from them is a testament to how great God's power is. I don't need to lessen the things that I am so that somebody thinks better of me. If I tell them who I am and then show them what God has done, then God's power is manifest, and they see that and they praise His name, even if they think badly of me. See, James 4:6 says this. He says that He gives grace generously. As the Scripture says, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. I saw on a wise man, I think we should be more proud of the things that God gives us that are hard and the places that we struggle. Not that we're glad we have them, but we're proud of what God's going to do through them. I saw on a wise friend's Instagram account last week, it says, you asked for strength, but God gave you your struggles to build it. God can work in our failures to improve us, even the things that aren't great. And the final thing that I would tell you is this: be a friend and not a fan. And you'll be like, are you kidding me? What's the difference? And I'm like, well, how's that even in the story? I don't see friend or fan in here. They're like two combatants, whatever. I'll tell you why I say that. A fan is someone who's a devotee of someone else, like a celebrity or an athlete or a coach or, an actor or something like that. And they love them until they love them. They think they're the greatest, and they might wear their T-shirts and everything until they do something that they don't like or something really wrong. I remember Michael Vick, who was a quarterback with the Atlanta Falcons years and years ago. Incredible athlete coming out of Virginia Tech. Everybody thought, Michael Vick, oh, he's so great. He's so electric. And then he got caught in a dogfighting ring, and then all his fans were like, oh, Michael Vick, he's a dogfighter. Ooh, he's terrible to animals. Ooh. And all of a sudden, they were all gone in a minute. I remember Bobby Petrino, I think he's still a coach around, but I remember he was at, I think it was Louisville, maybe? Or somewhere, but he was a coach. I can't remember where he was, somewhere, but I remember he got caught. He had a motorcycle wreck, and he had a co-ed who was riding with him on a motorcycle, and he was cheating on his wife with a co-ed. And all of a sudden, everybody's like, oh no, we fire him and cut him loose. And those things are terrible. But what fans do is when the return on relationship isn't worth it, they cut them loose. When the return on the relationship isn't worth it, they cut them loose. They're gone, and they'll actually turn on you, for that matter, because they once were gaining on your good things, living vicariously through the good stuff. Now they're gaining cred off destroying you for your bad things. And that's the same just user type of mentality. You got to watch that. When it's beneficial to them, they will keep on being there. But when the minute you're a liability, it's over. Be careful about that. That's kind of like the Pharisee. His entire relationship with the tax collector was like a fan, but like on the other side. It's like when you look at Auburn fans, for me. You're like, oh, look, Auburn fans. You know, they always have these memes, you know, and Auburn fans share memes of like some real weird-looking country person. They call that, look, Alabama fans, no teeth, you know, stuff like that. And then Alabama fans will do the same thing. You know, and it's meant in good fun. Nobody really means it. Well, I think some people probably mean it, but I have Auburn fans, and we go back and forth. But it's just meant to be in humor and good fun. But what some people do is they do it for real. And their entire relationship is about pointing out the negative in someone else, right? That's a fan the same way. If your whole mentality is about finding the negative on somebody and you're just drawing credit on that because I'm not like that. Look, I'm so much better than they are. And I want to virtue signal to everybody I know, or Christian virtue signal, which is prayer request, you know, sometimes, or whatever you do. I want to pull myself away from that over and over and over again. Sometimes we can be those people, and what we are being fans to that, even if it's negative. What you need to be is a friend. A friend is someone who's there, not for what they can get, but someone who is there because of what they can give. And what we're trying to do is get people closer to Jesus. Friends have your best interests at heart, even when you might not. The reality is the best friend thing that you can do, the best friend you can be, is to be one who moves your friends closer to Jesus. Now, I'm going to say it like this. Maybe that's sharing the gospel and you pray with them to receive Christ. Maybe it's giving godly wisdom at the right time. Maybe that's helping them understand Christ better, you know, or get through a situation. Or maybe it's just you being consistent in who you are and striving even when they don't understand and may push back on you, you being consistent in emulating Christ even in those situations. Being honest about your direction, both in success and failure. See, a lot of time we have problems being friends with people who aren't Christians. We don't really know what to do. You know, when I grew up, you can feel like you're at a crossroads when you become a Christian at times. I remember growing up, there was this big push, don't hang around with people who are bad influences and stuff like that. You know, and I always had a problem with that in Scripture, you know, because I get it. You know, you're sacrificing your life, you're trying to follow faith, and you feel like you're at this point where I have to sacrifice the friendship or I have to sacrifice my faith. But now there's this weirdness between you and them. You got new goals and new standards, and that brings weirdness. You know, and for me, like I said, some of it was like, you know, you stop hanging out with them. I'm going to tell you something different. You know, I had someone ask me one time about a friend of theirs that had a different set of values on something. She asked me, how should I handle that? And I just told her, I said, you're a friend, then be a friend. You be who you are, and you be a friend. And sometimes I think people think they need to end friendships because now that they follow Jesus and this other person doesn't. They got friends who don't, they're bad influences, so I can't stay with them. Do you ever think about how that would have been if Jesus thought that? Jesus felt that way? I mean, there's a lot of prostitutes and tax collectors who would have been out of luck. Pharisees too. Country boys from Alabama, totally out of luck. So how do you deal with it, though? Because let's be realistic, it's difficult when that happens in a relationship. I'm going to tell you something, that when you follow Christ and someone else doesn't, and especially if that happens, you've been friends before, and then you start to follow Christ, and it's different, the relationship it shouldn't stop, but it should change. There will be changes that you see, and I want to give you a few of those to just process through. Here's how the relationship changes. One, the activity changes. There have been actions that used to happen that you bonded over that they can't really happen on my side anymore. Now, I remember when I got saved at a younger age, and then I backslid for a little bit in college, and I had some friends that were lost, and we used to go out and drink and stuff like that. And then when I had my come to Jesus moment, and I got my life right with the Lord, I couldn't go do that anymore. And so there's a big bonding activity that was a weekly activity that we were doing things with, that if I'm going to maintain a relationship, I got to find another way around that. I can't do that anymore. It might be more, it doesn't have to be that. It might be you get together and you like to gossip about something or somebody. And maybe you're united around prejudice against another group of people, whether that's skin color or political group, whatever, or someone who just sins differently than you. And directly or indirectly, you guys get together, kind of build your worth up by tearing them down. And maybe you realize I can't do that. anymore. You know, if I see anything in their life, it should be about, I need to be praying for them to help them. I can't just gain off that. I can't be a part of things that don't honor Christ anymore, so I can't do that. You know, because you have changed, and that has to be redefined. So you have to decide, what you have to decide is, well, can the relationship survive that shift? You know, I think it can. Some do, some don't. It's like anything else. You know, you'll have a life stage change. You'll change your schedule. You'll be doing something different now, and then y'all don't see each other anymore. You know, it doesn't mean you cut it off. Maybe it's just a little bit different. But you have to be true to your direction. The second thing is the influence level changes. You know, I can't allow influence in some areas of my life that some friends of mine used to have very specific influence in. Can't do it. You know, they have different goals. And if I'm allowing them to influence my thinking on how I'm doing something, I know that's wrong. I know they're already starting from a tainted perception on that. You know, I can perceive that. And so I need to stop that. I mean, I need to have wise people around me. Proverbs 24:6 says, it tells us, so don't go to war without wise guidance. Victory often depends on having many advisors. And so what you want is people around you that have the highest influence to be people that follow Christ. It doesn't mean that they can't have any influence, that people who don't, they can't, you're going to have, if you have a friendship, someone's going to have some influence. You're going to have a little bit. You hope to have some in their life. But the highest influence has to come from another place. And there's some places they don't really, you can hear what they say, but they don't get to be your advisor on that. The primary goal also changes. You know, so and what that means is, especially on the end of the Christ follower, or at least my definition of what the result should be. You might always be a friend that is always trying to help out your friends, and you want them to be the best. But when you start following Christ, you realize the best is different. And you can have secondary goals. I mean, people aren't projects. You know, they're people. They're your friends. And I always should be for the best of my friend. But now that the faith element takes the forefront, I have a different idea of what best is. My best before might have been being their wingman or getting them a job, having their back in a fight. But now it has a broader purpose that changes for me what it looks like and what it is. What the goal is, I have to be different because I'm different. And you need to be okay with those changes happening. We redefine it. It's not that we can't play sports or go out to dinner or whatever, but I can't allow influence that pushes me away from Christ. And undergirding everything I do is this desire to know Christ and make Christ known to others. And that's going to be pushing everything I am. I can't fight against that. So some things will change. The relationships don't end, but they might change. Well, they will change. And here's the thing. There's no denying that there's some weirdness when we're different. You know, when Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 5, he said, you know, when we come to Christ, we're new creation. You know, and that doesn't come without changes. And people are going to look at you weird. I mean, you'll be following Christ and you'll probably go, I don't get it. You know, even some of my Christian brothers, maybe you look at somebody and, boy, they're following Christ. I don't know if I can do that. I'm glad you're doing it. You know, I mean, if that's Jesus, I'm glad you're doing it. He didn't ask me to do it. You know, you can really process through that. But the truth is that that's going to come. We're going to be different. Some of these changes won't come without conflict in the world. And the answer is not to run from the changes or try to mute them or try to fit in or look like the rest of the world. But the answer is to be transparent about who you are, both good and bad, and always point to Jesus and let Him take care of the circumstance around you. The best thing we can do, best advice I've ever seen is my job is Charles Stanley. He's gone on to be with the Lord. He was a pastor in Atlanta. But he said, my job is to be obedient and leave the results to God. And that's what we have to learn to be. And I think what happens is when we try to think that obedience is going to be a bad thing, so I need to kind of massage this for the Lord because He didn't really understand what was about to happen, when He's saying, yes, I did. What you want to do with people, especially with dealing with folks, is make sure when people are frustrated with you, it's because you're trying to live like Jesus. And you're presenting the accurate version of Himself and not messing it up like the Pharisee was. Because I'm sure Jesus was probably like, don't wear that God t-shirt for me, okay? Don't do that. You know, there's good kind of weirdness that's holy, and let's keep it real and be that. And let's avoid the bad kind of weirdness that really gets us nowhere. Now, maybe you're here or you're listening today and you haven't followed Jesus. Maybe this has been time you've never given your heart and your life to Christ. You know, you've never realized. You may say, I know I'm not perfect, but that's okay. And you realize, though, the Bible says we are all sinners, but the wages of sin is death. So I'm not perfect, and I'm in a mess. That's what it is. It's not, I'm not perfect, but that's okay. Everybody else is not. No, we're all in a mess. But the good thing is the gift of God is eternal life. And what God tells us is that he sent his son Jesus, who came and lived fully God, fully man on the earth, and he died on a cross to pay the punishment or the wages for our sin. And when he died on a cross and did that, he rose from the grave and he defeated death. And what he did for us is make it available for us to now, even though we have this sin, his punishment can cover that. His blood can cover that. And if we commit ourselves to him, it tells us in Romans 10, said if we confess our sin, he's faithful and just to forgive us of all righteousness. In Romans 10, 9, and 10, though, that's Ephesians. In Romans 10, 9, and 10, it tells us that if we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in our heart that God raised him from the dead, in other words, we confess outwardly, live outwardly that Jesus is Lord, and we believe in our heart, in other words, we on the inside, from the inside out, we believe that Jesus is who he said he is, and we trust him and commit our lives to him, that the Holy Spirit comes in and changes us into a new person. And then we start following Christ from there, and we can be saved, and that's where it is, and that's where the weirdness really starts. So if that's not you and you haven't accepted Christ today, we're going to have our prayer team will be over here right at the end of the service. And that is a place you can go there. You can grab me or grab Katie, the worship leader, or you can go and talk to somebody over here in this area of seats over here and talk to our prayer team, and they'll be able to share that with you and pray with you, because we want to help you become a Christ follower and become a mature one. Because once you start, it's just the start. So much more to go. But let's pray.